around the way we got through it, but here we are, chapter 8. Michael.
All right, well, thank you. Is this on? Yes? All good? All right. I'm going to set a timer, so I'll have you home by dinner. All right. And looking for, there we go. There we are. I don't know how long ago that picture was taken, but there we are. All right, so actually, when I heard that we were going to be speaking on the book of Daniel, and I had really wanted to be more committed to serving in the local body, I thought, hey, I need to step in. And I thought, if I could do any chapter in the book of Daniel, I wanted to do chapter 8. So I've been looking forward to this. I really have. So thank you so much. Let me just give you a little background before we step into prayer. We're going to be talking about Daniel 8. Of course, this is the vision of the ram on the Ulai Peninsula, Ulai Canal, and the goat coming from the west and slamming it. And so we're going to be talking about that in just a moment. But really, what I want to talk about, first of all, I just want to talk about God's mercy in telling us about this vision ahead of time and how important that would have been, especially for the people of Israel as they're going through this. Next, we're going to be talking about the vision and its interpretation. And what I call this is kind of one vision, but 2.5 stories. And I'll explain that when we get to it. That's the majority of the message. And then really, why should it matter to us today? Why is this so important in our day and age as well? And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the Feast of Dedication. A lot of you may not be aware that the festival of Hanukkah is actually directly told in the book of Daniel, chapter 8. And so a lot of people have asked me, actually, is Hanukkah in the Bible? And yes, of course, Jesus keeps the Feast of Hanukkah in chapter 10 of the Gospel of John. But specifically, the story of Hanukkah is actually told here in chapter 8. So that's the plan. So let's go ahead and open our word, open in a word of prayer. And Father, we thank you for a chance to be in your word again. Thank you so much that you would put these passages from Daniel out there so that we could know with certainty that no matter what's going on in our world, you are very aware of it. And you are very involved. There is nothing that's going on in our world that is surprising to you. And so we're thankful, Father, that we can be confident. You have shown us the end from the beginning. You have demonstrated that you and you alone know what's going on in history. So in spite of the fact that it would be tempting to be fearful in these days, we have a confidence that the God of the universe cares about the affairs of men and involves us and gives us an understanding that you are watching and you are aware. We bless you and praise you, Lord, because you are worth it. Hashem Yeshua Meshikenu, in the name of Jesus, our Messiah. Amen. So, first of all, God's mercy in telling us, it's really, I think, kind of important. Throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, there is this message of hope about the future of Israel. And what this is in 2 Samuel, there is a promise that God will always have a son of David on the throne of David in Jerusalem, in Mount Zion. But when we get to the book of Daniel, we have a real problem. Because, as a matter of fact, if you know, in 405 BCE, when Daniel is taken captive, so are others. And of course, the final king of Israel is taken captive. So, what's going on here? What's going on? God, you made these promises, and they seem to be broken. In Jeremiah 22:30, he shows that he speaks of the fact that this kingly line would be broken. And in essence, the tree of David, or the line of David, is going to be broken right here. Other places it's referred to as the stump of David. At this point, there will no longer be any kings coming from this line of David. Here we have in Jeremiah 22 where it says, "Thus says the Lord, write this man down as childless, the man who shall not prosper in his days, for none of his descendants shall prosper, sitting on the throne of David and ruling anymore in Judah." It's over. And you might be sitting here thinking, that's terrifying. I thought God promised us that there would be always a king on the throne of David, and yet it looks completely broken. Isaiah, I love the fact that God does this. Isaiah had already prophesied of God's faithfulness in spite of Israel's failure, and the stump would yet live. And so we read this in Isaiah 11 where it says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from the roots shall bear fruit." I don't know if you've paid attention, especially in the book of Jeremiah, where he constantly refers to the Messiah as the branch. And so it goes on and it says, "And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord, and his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord." And so there's this promise, even before the breaking of the line, God's already saying, "But I have a plan. Trust me." And I think this is good because it causes us to trust not just in what God says, but in him, because that's where our faith belongs. And so in this mercy's telling, God is always allowing history to be revealed ahead of time, and that Israel can see that in spite of the current situation, God is still behind the scenes, still alive, still sovereign. God's faithfulness in the smaller fulfillments, and today we're going to be looking at a very important fulfillment, but yet in the big picture of all that's going to happen, it's actually a small fulfillment, but it affects the people of that day immensely. And so God's fulfillment in these, God's faithfulness in these smaller fulfillments, such as we see in this chapter, are evident in his ultimate future, meaning by seeing that God has been faithfully fulfilling all the steps in the process, we can be confident that the outcome is also what he said, and the outcome is when Messiah will permanently reign from the throne of David in Jerusalem. So now we're going to spend our time, the majority of our time, really talking about what I call this one vision in these 2.5 stories. And so what I will say, when I got into this issue of vision, I have for years kind of struggled with, like, how do you ever get into prophecy? And I was telling, I was thinking about this morning, where I realized that if there was one chapter I would have to help people that don't understand prophecy, this would actually be a starting point for me, because the entire vision is presented and then the entire interpretation, and that vision and interpretation are tied into so many parts of the Bible, and it really helps you connect it all together. So I would love I really wanted to do a thing on how to enter into understanding prophecy. So I hope you enjoy this. God speaks of his sovereignty over all of human history in this verse where he says, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings." And I don't know if this is true. I was talking about it with Ed a couple of weeks ago. I personally believe that when we see that phrase, he's changing times and seasons, that actually he's basically saying that second half of that couplet where he's the one removing kings and setting up kings. In other words, history is being told through these kings being raised up and taken down, and God is the one doing it. So when we see these things happening, it would be really tempting to think that the entire world's out of control, but he's actually the one right behind the scenes watching it and actually seeing it through. So here's what we have, if you will. This is a kind of a summary of the book of Daniel. I really liked this when I found it. And the first vision, of course, is the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, right? And if you remember correctly, Nebuchadnezzar is having a dream, but what's on his mind as he's been thinking, according to the interpretation, is that he's wondering what will happen in days ahead. And so God has basically answered his prayer and said, "I'm going to show you what's ahead." And he shows him this vision. He shows him this idol. And what happens is, Daniel even says, "You, O king, are the head of gold, and after you will come another kingdom." And so he starts to talk about these kingdoms from the head of gold to a lesser valuable, but still valuable, another kingdom that's all going to be silver, then it's going to go to bronze, then it's going to go to iron. And he basically sets in place what's commonly referred to as the time of the Gentiles. He's saying, here's what's going to happen during the times of the Gentiles. And it's going to be this massive, it's going to be a picture laid out by this massive image. So really what we'll find out, and I know you're going to have to take it on trust unless you already looked it for yourself, but this is basically the empire of Babylon give way to the empire of Media Persia and to Greece, and then the fourth kingdom, which is a little bit more confusing, and I'm going to leave that one for somebody else to tie into, but basically it begins with Rome, but it doesn't end there in traditionally what we call Rome. So we have this vision, if you will, laid out in Daniel 2, and what happens with these kingdoms coming up, being laid down and come up. Well, it turns out in Daniel 7, which Ed covered a couple of weeks ago, the same story is being told from a different point of view. See, from the Gentile point of view, those kingdoms are glorious, they're beautiful, they're gold, silver, bronze, and all this stuff. But to the people of Israel, they're not at all. They're viewed as beasts, ravenous beasts, but it's the same story. So it's the same timeline. And then what we see in chapter 8, where we're going to be today, is a small part of that timeline, going from the second kingdom to the third kingdom, the kingdom of the Medes and Persians to the kingdom of Greece. And what it's going to be looking at is that transition. And so that's what chapter 8 is. It's sort of zoomed in on this particular area. And again, I think the reason God wants to do it is twofold. One, to demonstrate again, I'm very aware of what's going on in human history in spite of the fact that you must be terrified. And second of all, I want to draw your attention to something that we'll call the little horn, because he's going to play an important role, not only now, but in the future. All right, so the three segments here that we're going to be talking about in the book of in the book of Daniel is chapter 8. What we're going to look at is the vision, which goes from verses 1 to 14, the interpretation or the request for the interpretation, which is in 15 to 17, and finally interpretation 8 to almost the end. I'm not going to cover the last verse just because I'll probably run out of time, so I want to be fair to you. So we're going to be looking at the vision first. So again, I'm going to summarize this picture because if you're like me, sometimes you get to the end of a chapter and you can't remember what was at the beginning of the chapter. Let me sum it up for you. This is going to be talking about two beasts or two animals in this situation. One is going to be this ram, this two-horned ram on the canal of the Ulai, and we're going to find out in a bit that this actually represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And the second is this goat, seemingly flying in from the west, and basically it's going to take down the ram, okay? So, and that's going to represent Greece. Again, you're taking my word for it now, but you don't have to, because the scriptures lay it out very clearly. So, let's start. It says, in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, in a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after which appeared to me at the first. And I saw the vision, and when I saw it, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you'll notice here that he is talking about a specific time, a specific place. This is literal language. This is not figurative language. He's saying, when I got this vision, it was a very real thing. And the reason I say this is there's so many people that look at the prophecies of Daniel and just say, oh, it's all figurative language. Nobody can ever figure it out. No, Daniel intends for you to read this as if it's a real story, a real vision, and there will be a real interpretation. So he's encouraging you not to take it merely figuratively. When I was doing this, I don't necessarily look up commentaries, but I often go out and look for pictures on the web that help. And it was so fascinating as I looked through the pictures that I came up with, how often it said, oh, the goat is the United States, and the ram is, and I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And it really, if you look out there, the majority of interpretations about the book of Daniel are just odd. They just don't fit with the text. So what I'm saying is let's look at this as if it's real, because it is, all right? So now, I saw a vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram. By the way, I'm just going to circle some things because some of the main characters in the story, I think it would be Again, so a ram. So I see this ram standing on the bank of the canal, and it had two horns. And both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand against him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. Then it goes on and it says, as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with two horns. So he came to that one that we've already talked about, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal. Now he, that male goat, ran at him, ran at the ram, and in his powerful wrath, I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and he struck the ram and broke the two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he, that goat, cast the ram down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken off. We're almost done. And then he says, and instead there came up four conspicuous horns toward the winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and towards the glorious land. And it grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. The little horn became great, even as great as the prince of the host, and the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of the sanctuary was overthrown, and a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgressions. And it, that little horn, will throw truth to the ground, and that little horn will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking. Two more characters here, two holy ones. And he says, a holy one speaking to another holy one, and said, and when he spoke, he said, for how long is this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, the giving over of the sanctuary, and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said, that Holy One said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. So that's the end of the vision. And so what in the world was all of that? And this is where I would have typically just kind of given up and said, just sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. It's kind of like, oh, the cat is facing west and the dog jumped over the moon. And I don't know what all that means. But the fact is the beauty is God interprets it right after. And so first we see this situation where when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. That's what we need to do. When we come across stuff in the scriptures that we don't understand, don't go wandering away. Ask God. He means if he put it down, he intends us to understand it. And that's where our first place has to lie, to ask God and put it before him. And behold, stood before me one having the appearance of man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called out, Gabriel, make this man understand this vision. So I came near. So he came near to where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. Okay, so we're talking about this vision that seems to be for the time of the end. What does that mean? We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so now he's going to go right into the interpretation. He's actually going to share what all of this stuff meant. So let's look at this. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. Notice this term latter end because it's going to be kind of important because it comes up again, all right? And this situation refers to the appointed time of the end. So whatever happens here at this latter end has to do not only with this latter end, but for a time in the future, the time of the end, if you will. As for the ram you saw, oh, good. He's going to tell us. As for the ram you saw with two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. He's telling you exactly what the ram is with the two horns. He's saying these are the kings of Media and Persia. And so let's take a look at this. Remember back in the actual vision, this is now we're in the interpretation, but if we go back to the vision, it says, now I saw the ram charging westward, northward, and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. Well, if you look back in history, you will find out that's exactly what was happening at the end of the Medo-Persian Empire. The final king living in the citadel of Susa was incredibly powerful, and what was happening was the Medo-Persian Empire was expanding at a very rapid rate. It was going northward, it was going westward, almost all the way to Greece, and it was going southward into Egypt. And so this is what was going on at the end of the Medo-Persian Empire, just as God was showing in the vision. And then it goes on and it says, well, wait a minute, what about the goat? Well, the goat is the king of Greece. Oh, that's nice. He's telling us who it is. And then he goes, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king of Greece. And so when the Greek Empire came up, the first great king of the Medo-Persian Empire that began to expand like crazy is a guy named Alexander the Great. Anybody ever heard of him? Yeah, right? There's like tons of history. You can find out all kinds of stuff on even Wikipedia. Like they didn't even get it wrong. They were trying, but they didn't. So the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is that first king. This is, if you will, this is Alexander the Great. And remember, back in the vision, what did it say the goat was going to be doing? It says, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. We've already figured out that conspicuous horn is the first king. But what does this mean that he was coming from the west without touching the ground? I think it would be helpful to know. Well, I'll tell you right now, this to me is, I think, the vision that's going on in his head. When a horse is at full gallop, that horse spends more time in the air than it ever does touching the ground. It is moving fast. Now, you might be saying, oh, you're making this up. Okay, that might be true. I'll be honest. But here's what's really going on. This is, oh, I didn't think about this. Does it have a pointer? Oh, it does. So, anybody know how old Alexander the Great was when he started this conquest? He was 20 years old. This is absolutely amazing. So he leaves Macedonia, which becomes the center of the Greek Empire, and he leaves and he basically goes through and he captures what is modern-day Turkey. Then he goes down through the glorious land, the land of Israel, and he takes over all of Egypt. And then he goes back up through and eventually ends up in Babylon and Susa and basically sacks the entire Persian Empire in 4 years. All of that right there he did in 4 years. Absolutely impossible to believe that would ever happen again today. Yet, he goes on from there, and he continues down through, and he basically goes through and is just capturing everything along the way to the point where he finally comes back to Babylon, and it says when he was 30 years old, he began to weep because there was nothing left to conquer. This is documented very clearly. He actually wept. It was like, I wanted to conquer the world, and I've done it, and I've done it in 10 years. There's nothing left. There's no meaning left for me. This is what I wanted to do with my life, and there's nothing left to do. And amazingly, while he was in Babylon, he got sick and died very rapidly. So by the time he was 32, he was dead. That whole thing happened in a 12-year period. Unbelievable when you think of it. Well, let's continue to look at what the prophecy says. And the horn, what was the horn, the conspicuous horn? It was the first king was broken, right? Oops, sorry. So this horn was broken off, and in its place 4 others rose. 4 kingdoms shall arise out of his nation and his power. And lo and behold, when Alexander dies, he doesn't have any offspring. And so his kingdom is split into 4 different parts for the 4 different major generals that were in his command. And so this is where we are. These are the 4 different four different kingdoms, empires that come up in place. And the main focus we're going to be looking at is Ptolemy and the Seleucid Empire. And notice where they come together. This is important not for today, but it's really important going on because you're going to be constantly reading about the king of the south and the king of the north and all of the fights that are going on right in the land of Israel. Okay? So this is really important. But the point here is what we have is these four kings replace, if you will, that prominent horn on the goat. Now it's four different horns. Horns speak of great leaders. So the point is, that's exactly what the first part of this vision seems to be all about. This first part of the vision is all about the transfer from that second kingdom, Medo-Persia, and ending up in the kingdom of Greece. Okay? But there's a second part of this vision, and it goes back to, and you'll notice this term again, the latter end. Sorry, I can't do that. So it says this, at the latter end of their kingdom, when transgressions have reached, something else is going to happen. And Daniel's really going to zoom in on this guy. All right? So it says this, at the latter end of the kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not of his own power. Somehow or other, there is a power bigger than him that is able to do all this. And he shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does and destroy mighty men and the people who are of the saints. So he overcomes the saints. Starting to sound familiar with other parts of the Bible? By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. It continues on. Well, actually, so what I wanted to point out here is what you have is this king, this little horn. That's what it says. From the four horns, right? From the four horns, the map of the four horns, from the Seleucid Empire, a little horn comes up right in the middle of it. And this is who it's speaking of. This little horn is this king who's massively destructive and is able to overcome the saints, and his power is not coming from within him. Well, is this something new in the Bible? Actually, it's not. There are other places that also seem to have characters like this, usually kings that seem to be somehow or other bigger than just that king. Here's an example. Here's a couple of examples. The first one is in Ezekiel, talking about the king of Tyre. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lament against the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you, and you were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created till iniquity was found in you. Is he talking about the king of Tyre? He's talking about Satan. Satan has somehow or other stepped into the king of Tyre so much that when God looks on him, he pronounces that I see right through the disguise of the king of Tyre. I see who you are, Satan. And this is exactly what I think God is talking about with this little horn. This little horn, who we will find out through history is called Antiochus Epiphanes, is the same type of character. Here's another one, the king of Babylon. How you have fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, you who cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into the heavens. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of what? The pit. Who is this again? Satan again, in disguise of the king of Babylon. So that's what I'm saying. I think this little horn, I think it's reasonable to believe that this little horn is in fact Satan masquerading in a man's body. Okay? So, the reason I say this is because we have 2.5 stories here. We have the first story, which of course is the change of the empires from the Medo-Persian Empire to the Greek Empire. But then we have this story that that involves seemingly satanically controlled leader who will come against the holy people and desecrate the temple at the latter time of that reign. That is Antiochus Epiphanes. We'll show that in a minute. But there's another half of this story because, again, remember, it keeps saying these are important for your times of the end. The story 2, or the second half of that story, seems to be an ultimate and final attempt by Satan just to destroy the people of God in end times. He's showing them ahead of time what will come. Now, is he doing this merely to scare them? I don't think so. We'll talk about in the end. But if you know what's coming and you know what to look for, you know where you are in history. And you also know that if God has been truthful all along, that the ultimate truth, the ultimate fulfillment is also true. When the Son of David will rise and will rule from Jerusalem eternally forever. And every tear will be wiped from our eyes. So there's hope in the future, but there's the reality of the present. So here it is, Antiochus Epiphanes. First of all, the word Epiphanos means manifestation of God, or basically God incarnate. So he declares himself to be God, and the fact that he is God is actually in the coin, in the writing on the coins. He seeks to destroy Jerusalem. Why would he want to destroy Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem declares to be serving the one and only true God, and you can't have two. It's either me or nobody, right? And so what Antiochus Epiphanes does is he seeks to destroy Jerusalem, to desecrate their temple, and to end burnt offering and anything to do with the worship of God, worship of Jehovah, the God. So for how long? Well, in this vision, remember, during the vision, there's these two holy ones talking, and they say, how long will this vision be concerning the regular burnt offerings, the transgression that makes desolate, the giving over of the sanctuary, and the host being trampled underfoot? How long is this going to go on? And he replied and said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored to its right state. In other words, this is going to go on for exactly 2,300 years, not years, but days, and then it will be restored. So it is temporary. So, during the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, number one, he makes reading the Torah a capital offense. Dai, earlier when you were talking about what it would be like to be basically told if you read the Bible and share it on social media, you're going to be referred to as a hater, hate speech. Yeah, this is part of the history of Israel. And we will feel, I'm sure we may feel these very things before the time when we're taken away. So reading of Torah is now a capital offense. If you do it, you die. The Jewish people were encouraged to turn to Hellenism, and it seems to be quite possible that about 2/3 of Israel did go that way, at least half. As a matter of fact, the high priest Jason also goes along with the Greeks, and so now you not only have the individual trying to make the decision, do I follow the Greeks, or do I stay with the religion that I know I've been told there is no other? And the high priest himself is actually going the direction of the Greeks. During this time, a Greek general requires that a priest by the name of Matthias Maccabees slaughter a pig as a sacrifice in the temple. And Matthias says no, and he absolutely refuses. He believes there is only one God, and you can only be observing one God. So it turns out that the general went and turned and he found a Hellenistic Jew, a Jewish person that said, okay, I'll agree with Hellenism, and he basically says, you do it. And so this Hellenistic Jew starts to go through the process, and Maccabee cannot take it. And he finally grabs the sword from the general, and he slaughters both the man that was about to sacrifice the pig and turns around and kills the general of Antiochus Epiphanes' army, and one of the generals. Well, now you have just started a massive, massive military action in Israel. And that's exactly what happened. So here's one of the many pictures. There's lots of pictures out there. You'll see a couple in a few minutes. So this becomes known as the Maccabean Revolt. And by the way, this is extremely well documented. There's lots and lots of history about this. But basically, during this, about 10,000 poorly armed Jewish men, very loosely tied together, start a guerrilla warfare campaign against about 65,000 of the best armed and trained troops in the entire world at that time. And they are all falling under Judas Maccabee, the son of Matthias Maccabee, the priest. The Jewish people end up actually winning and driving Antiochus Epiphanes out of the land of Israel. As a matter of fact, under their rule, they are no longer under any rule. They actually are printing coinage for Israel. They're actually a self-ruling country for about 3.5 years during this time. Antiochus Epiphanes, as he's driven out, is actually, I don't remember, I tried to look it up, but I was running out of time. I can't remember if he died because he got sick or he was killed. But the bottom line is Antiochus Epiphanes, this guy who couldn't be, pushed back, couldn't be rebelled against, is all of a sudden dead when these poor people that couldn't, basically a small, tiny army went against this massive army. And the Jewish priests, after this point, start to cleanse the temple of the Holy Temple. So here's the problem. As they start to cleanse the temple, they run into a big problem. The floor of the temple has been completely covered, and in it is pig's blood. It's all over the place. And so the temple floor can't be used. So what they do, the original floor of the temple laid by Solomon is desecrated in pig's blood. So during the cleansing, the temple floor is pulled out of the temple. They don't know what to do with it. So they set it on a side part of the pavement, and they call that pavement Solomon's portico. You ever heard of that? And you know what they do? And this is documented in the Talmud. It says, when the Messiah comes, he will tell us what to do with it. So they basically say, we don't know what to do with it, so we're going to put it here. We'll replace what's in the building. And when the Messiah comes, he'll tell us what to do with it because we can't get rid of it. It's part of the original temple. We don't want to. And so I want to jump into John 10 for just a moment. And it says, now at the Feast of Dedication, that's Hanukkah, in Jerusalem, it was winter, and Jesus walked into the temple and walked into Solomon's porch, Solomon's portico. Then the Jews surrounded him and said, how long will you keep us in doubt? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. They want to know, is this why you've come this day to this part of the tabernacle? Because they know that if he's truly the Messiah, he would be the one that they would ask. We don't get an answer that day, but you can see how all of this is very clear in the head of Jesus at this time. So finally, the rededication ends, and when does it end? 2,300 days exactly from the day that Antiochus Epiphanes had walked into the temple, desecrated it, and set up the idol of Zeus. And that's all documented as well in history, both biblical history. Well, it's not documented biblically. It's actually documented extra-biblically, but it's very well known. So finally, we're down to the last couple of things. Why should this matter to us, right? Why does any of this matter? Well, I want to read a couple of passages because there's passages that the scriptures give us to tell us what's happening in end times, right? Like this one, it says, but know this, that in the last day perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, Sounds like a resume of a politician to me. And quite frankly, it's unfortunately the resume of most people on the earth today, right? What do we do when we have to live in such a place in such a time? Another place says this: God gave them over to a debased mind. This is in Romans 1. I apologize for not putting down I think it's probably about Romans 1:19 I'm sorry, it's right around 20, so you can see it, end of 20. So God gave them over to a debased mind to do things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. Lord, what's going on? You must be out of control. God's saying, no, I'm not out of control. I'm telling you these things ahead of time so that you know when they're coming that there's more to come. We are living in amazingly wicked and confused days right now, and quite frankly, you notice that it's changing more quickly too. Like, it's not linear. It's not just slowly getting worse. It's getting worse and getting worse exponentially, faster and faster. Just in the Jews of Antiochus Epiphanes' day, it would be tempting to be frustrated and wondering if God is really there and listening. Luke says, or Jesus says this: now when these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws nigh. Folks, all this bad stuff that we're going through, God already said it was going to happen. Don't be discouraged. Recognize we're getting close to the end of this. There is reason to hope, and I think that's why this passage was so important, that Daniel shared this, so that the people of Israel, in spite of what they were going to go through, had reasons for hope and a future. Does that make sense? So finally, I just want to talk very briefly about the Feast of Dedication, and then I'm done. So this is called Hanukkah. The word Hanukkah is dedication. And the festival of Hanukkah is also referred in places as the Festival of Lights, just be aware. And it commemorates the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem in 167 BCE, after Antiochus Epiphanes had desecrated it. It is celebrated on the 25th of Kislev, which roughly lands somewhere between late November and late December, okay? So let's celebrate with this simple video, and we'll wrap up with a prayer. Uh-oh, no sound. Can you get me sound?
That Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, doesn't hold a candle to Christmas. Okay, so it's no secret that Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, doesn't hold a candle to Christmas.
Help you understand, there's always kind of the frustration that Hanukkah tends to land near Christmas. And all the Jewish kids look and see all the Christmas presents and all this stuff and all the celebrations, and the Jewish kids only have Hanukkah. And Hanukkah's a little bit, it's not a major feast. It's a feast, but it's not one of the big feasts. So,
okay, so it's
nothing?
Okay, so it's no secret that Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, doesn't hold a candle to Christmas. Christmas, 450,000 multicolored strobe lights pulsing and flashing over every square inch of the house.